It's truly a pleasure to welcome you to today's Philanthropy for Climate Technical Assistance Workshop, co-hosted by Caribbean Philanthropic Alliance and Wings. I want to thank each of you for taking the time to be here. We're delighted to have many of you here with us today. Many of you represent a cross-section of our philanthropic community, practitioners and partners from across the region and beyond. And I want to share that your presence here today affirms that this conversation that we're going to have today is quite timely and urgent. So thank you all for coming. Why we're here. As you all know, the Caribbean is at the front lines of a climate crisis. Many of you who are here live in the region, so it's not new to you. Our communities are living through the effects of rising seas, stronger storms, biodiversity loss, and the widening of inequalities, and all of which we know threaten our livelihoods, our economies, and our sense of being and our sense of place. And so the climate emergency is not a distant threat for us. It's a lived reality that demands urgent and strategic action. And philanthropy can no longer remain on the sidelines. Many of us have not necessarily been on the sidelines, but we must now drive differently and be a driving force for coordinated, courageous, and sustained response. And what that means for us, many of us here on the call and on the Zoom, is that it means that we're going beyond a reactive giving and investing in long-term solutions rooted in justice, resilience, and equity. And that is what we will be talking about today. So this is the heart of the session today that we will tackle together. So our goal today is not just to talk about climate philanthropy, but to build on the infrastructure and shared direction needed to move forward together. So thank you all for coming again. So in terms of Carifil's role, I just wanted to share real quickly that Caribbean Philanthropic Alliance, we call ourselves Carifil. We've been around since 2019, and we exist to strengthen and connect the philanthropic ecosystem across the region. When we talk about ourselves, we talk about ourselves as a philanthropic serving organization. And our primary mission is to mobilize resources across the region, amplify leadership, and catalyze as much as possible in strategic collaboration that aligns with philanthropy with the most pressing needs of our Caribbean communities. We serve as a convener, what we're doing today. We bring together funders, civil society, private sector allies, and government partners to exchange knowledge and co-create solutions. And so we also act as a trusted navigator in the space, particularly for our global community. And we support institutions aligning with giving with values of equity and sustainability and long-term impact. Through initiatives like the one we're going to talk about today, CLASP, which stands for Climate Philanthropy and Strategic Partnerships, we help funders integrate climate considerations into their strategies. And we champion bold regional approaches that reflect the urgency that's upon us today and also the local wisdom across our region. Today's workshop, in many ways, is to fulfill that role. We hope today that we'll be able to equip our philanthropy community with tools, frameworks, and relationships needed to lead with purpose in this climate critical moment. And so we look forward with you sharing with us today. Our agenda is quite robust. It's from 10 to 11:30, so I hope you're able to stay with us today. You can put up the agenda, Dwayne. Our agenda is purposely designed to be participatory and practical. So hopefully I won't be talking too much today. And we look forward to hearing from you. We will begin with context setting by myself and Erika Miller from Wings, who has been a critical global ally in this work. Auro Fraser will join us from Open Society, and he will give a quick global regional lens on the role of philanthropy in a changing, in the context of a changing climate. Erika will guide us through a 7-pillar framework. This is a powerful tool that you'll hear today for anchoring philanthropic institutions in climate principles and actions. And then after that, we'll break into small groups for a deeper discussion. And we hope that these conversations will allow us to explore how these pillars resonate in your country and in your organizational context, and identify opportunities for immediate action. And then we'll come back together and we'll reconvene to share some key reflections and discuss next steps, including the formation of a funder commitment committee. So hopefully you stay to the end, and so that you could be part of the committee that is going to be very important for us to develop the funder commitment draft, and also leading to our Caribbean Philanthropic Forum this October in Kingston, and of course COP30 in Brazil. And so I invite all of you to bring your full voice to the conversation, please. We expect to hear from you. Please challenge us with questions. We expect dialogue, and most importantly, we expect to leave with some clarity about how we can act individually and collectively to have a more climate resilient Caribbean. Our objectives for the session are four. We have four critical things we want to achieve today. Be important for us to have a deeper understanding of philanthropy's role in addressing climate change, especially in our region. We'll introduce you to our international philanthropic commitment to climate change and the 7 pillars as tools for accountability and alignment. Equip you with some practical resources and tools, and of course, help us to sort of chart a course to create a regional roadmap with some early steps in how to develop this draft, the funder commitment draft. I'm going to say just a few words about the importance of the funder commitment before we get started, and that at Caribbean Philanthropic Alliance, we are working to localize and lead a regional funder commitment on climate change. This is not just about aligning to global frameworks that you'll hear today. It's about grounding them in our Caribbean realities. So it's very important that when you listen to Erika today, that we spend time thinking about where we sit within the region and how it applies to us. The funder commitment that we will design together will help us to clarify our shared climate goals in the region, in the Caribbean, and among Caribbean serving funders. It will help to build internal capacity and accountability to track impact, and also to help strengthen collaboration that's already existing across institutions, sectors, and of course, across borders. And as importantly, to mobilize resources and partners to scale the work that's ahead of us. We are very proud to host this technical assistance workshop as part of our broader CLASP initiative, which stands for Climate Philanthropy and Strategic Partnerships, and to explore the 7 pillars, which will serve as our framework and foundation for our collective journey together. The 7 pillars are on the screen for you to just look at, peruse real quickly. I'm not going to go into it. You're going to hear from Erika, who's going to spend time on it. And the 7 pillars go from education and learning all the way to transparency. So you'll hear more from Erika on this. And then the quick fact check here is that CLASP is a call to action. It's a dedicated platform to galvanize funders of all sizes. So many of you here represent small foundations, grassroots donors, community foundations, traditional and philanthropic institutions. And we're here to support funders in sharing their past commitments to climate, but also their present commitments to addressing climate change in the region. And so we're inviting all of you to share, to strengthen and scale the commitment to climate action. In terms of who we are joining when we talk about philanthropy for climate. There's a map here, real quickly, that I'm sure you've seen on our website of our signing countries. And currently, there are several countries, and again, you'll hear more specifically from Erika about some of the countries that have already signed on to a funded commitment. And so, of course, Caraphil will be the host and will serve as the regional anchor for the Philanthropy for Climate movement. And so our purpose is to align many of you that are here today, align Caribbean funders with the other hundreds of foundations worldwide that have pledged to act boldly and urgently in response to the climate crisis. And so we hope by localizing this global momentum, this will ensure that the Caribbean has both a seat at the table and has a strong unified voice in shaping a climate platform for the Caribbean. So who is in the room today and who we've invited? Today we have many of you who are key stakeholders, you're regional contributors. Some of you are from the global community, and you will contribute in two ways. I think the first way is to help shape the funder commitment, which is what we're going to do today with others. And then the second way is to endorse and sign the funder commitment. And again, we will spend some time there. And so our funder and philanthropic institutions, in terms of how we are presenting it here today, and we can talk a little bit about it more, are our community foundations, our private and family foundations, our donor collaboratives, our CSR units, international development partners, bilateral, multilateral funders. And these are actors who can directly commit resources, influence priorities, and embed climate action in their funding strategies. And then we would say that the other group, which are critically important, are what we call our enabling partners and field builders. And these institutions, some of you are here, that will support and amplify and sustain the philanthropic ecosystem. And so some of you represent academic institutions. Some of you are data and evaluation experts. Some of you are fiscal intermediaries, and others represent philanthropic networks and NGOs. And so the role of the field builders is to build the infrastructure, the credibility and accountability systems that will allow the climate philanthropy to grow and thrive. And so we hope that together, these two groups will form the ecosystem that will bring together and bring and develop a Caribbean funder commitment to life. And so the intention here is not just a document, but a living strategy for us for collective action. And I would just say, looking ahead, today's meeting is just the beginning. So thank you all for being part of this important step. And it's part of a larger arc for us that will lead to two major milestones in the near future. So one, as I shared before, we have a philanthropy forum on October 29th and 30th in Kingston, Jamaica. And there we publicly launch our draft funder commitment there. And of course, we would hope that we'll be able to spotlight this funded commitment in Belém, Brazil, with our partners, Wings, who will be attending that particular forum itself. And so we hope today will offer each of you the knowledge that you need, but most importantly, that we'll operate as a community. Careful is a family. This is a space where we want to ask hard questions, exchange experiences, and build some bigger, and that what we're talking about is bigger than just one organization. And we look forward to your active participation and hearing from you and your ideas. And so I want to thank you all again for being part of this important technical assistance workshop. So I'm going to turn it over to Erika Miller, who's a climate lead at Wings. who will welcome you also and briefly just share the global landscape of climate philanthropy. And at some point, we're going to get you to introduce yourselves, but now we just want to get to the beginning of this session. So, Erika, over to you.
Thank you, Anthea. Good morning, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be here. We have been working a lot with the team at CaryPhil up to this
You on,
moment
Erika?
Can you hear me?
Yes, hearing you clearly, Erika.
Anthea, you hear me?
I'm not hearing you.
I think all of us can hear you, maybe except Anthea at the moment, Erika.
Yes.
Okay.
You can continue, Erika. I'll call Anthea separate. Go ahead.
Okay.
Thank you. So as I was saying, we've been working a lot with the team at CaryPhil towards this moment, and I think previewed some of the work we did on a podcast that I hope you've all had a chance to listen to. It was great to have my first podcast experience be alongside Anthea talking about this really exciting initiative. So as we kind of mentioned in the introduction by Anthea, I will be going into a bit of a deeper presentation about the pillars of philanthropy for climate. I think after we get a good context setting from Auro, but we at Wings are a global network of philanthropy support organizations or serving organizations, like Anthea mentioned, CaryPhil is, and foundations who invest in the field of philanthropy. We bring together really the entirety of what the philanthropy ecosystem is. So not only the PSOs and the funders, but also academia that does research into philanthropy, private family offices, intermediary funds, anything you can think of that kind of or as an organization that exists to support and catalyze the field of philanthropy. We work across a few different thematic areas, but climate is one of our primary areas that we took on about 3 years ago, as we integrated it really deeply into our strategy, when we recognized that if we are an organization that exists to support the field of philanthropy, we can no longer, we can't do that without talking about climate, as it intersects and really threatens actually the pursuits of what philanthropy exists for, that climate affects and is affected by all of the development thematics and focuses that philanthropy looks at. So we deeply integrated climate across all of the work at Wings, both from our ecosystems building work down into our collective intelligence work and the work we do with our policy and advocacy as well. So I'm going to stop there because I'm going to go into the pillars afterwards. And then I think, I guess, Anthea, back to you or over to Auro, whoever's coming in next.
Wonderful. And I do see Auro there. So welcome, Auro. It's my pleasure to introduce you. Auro Fraser may not be a stranger to many of you. Auro brings global perspective and deep regional insight to the conversation of climate philanthropy. I would say, Auro, you're a dedicated philanthropy strategist with Open Society Foundations. He is focused on advancing social justice, equity, and system change, and values that especially are vital as we respond to the climate crisis. Auro has worked extensively across geographies, including the Caribbean, and is known for his thought leadership and his inclusive, responsive approach to the work. So this morning, he will offer us a quick overview of the philanthropy's role in changing climate, and it will give us some quick reflections on the global shifts and what is happening and how, how it intersects with the realities here in the Caribbean. And so over to you, Auro, and welcome. And thank you for being part of this session today.
Thanks, Anthea. It's always uncomfortable to hear the introduction, but I appreciate that. I'll share a presentation if that's okay. How long have I got, Anthea?
Yeah, please go ahead and share.
Sure, and hi to everybody else. I mean, I'm one of those people that sort of doesn't always do what I'm told. So I thought what I'd do is is give a bit of from our perspective on the opportunities and challenges for Caribbean climate philanthropy. And I think this is the sort of overview that I thought of. And so this PowerPoint, I sent it to myself and it got corrupted. So I was at the last minute reorganizing. So you'll see later that the photos are a bit unorganized. But everyone can see it, right?
You all can see
So
it.
great. So, you know, Carifil's already done a study on this and highlighted that the Caribbean receives less than 2% of climate funding, which is very little given that the Caribbean is the world's most climate impacted region, the world's most food insecure region, the world's most indebted region, and the world's most ignored region by global philanthropy. And even within climate finance, there's more money for some things and less money for others. Being on the very front lines, the Caribbean really needs two sorts of funding most. For adaptation, to make sure that the countries continue to function and work and people can live, and loss and damage, which is, as you all know, is the funding that is for the impacts of climate change that cannot be adapted to. And the Caribbean really faces that. And globally, rich countries and philanthropies have not dedicated many resources to that. And so there's a need for, given that the Caribbean is a negligible emitter, the focus on mitigation funding is welcome, but not really the most necessary thing for the Caribbean. But we'll probably talk a little bit about mitigation later. Global philanthropy is quite far from Caribbean realities, and it's not coordinated. So people come in. Some of the very few organizations that have come in from a global perspective tend to comment from a global perspective, and not based on the realities of the region. So they'll focus, like I say, on mitigation rather than adaptation, loss and damage. They also tend to not have Caribbean people working for them who understand the region and its dynamics, the politics, the social conditions, and so on. So they kind of tend to import Latin American realities and understandings quite often, or global ones. And they tend to sort of be very capricious in what's kind of fashionable now and of interest now, again, not based on the long-term needs and interests of the region. Bilateral funding there is some bilateral climate funding, but it tends to support the interests of the bilateral partner. It tends to be conditioned to things that don't challenge the narratives that the donor country is giving, whether it's on mitigation or on loss and damage so that's why one of the reasons why Caribbean philanthropy is really necessary to fill a gap, to take on the very actually contentious. One thinks that the climate philanthropy is not contentious. It's about climate. It's actually very political. So Caribbean philanthropy has a great opportunity to step up and take the voices of Caribbean people, which will not be funded by outside actors. And the complexity of climate, which has an impact right across sectors, and all these sectors need to be taken into account, and the solutions joined up. I think only Caribbean philanthropy can do that in an effective way, very thoughtfully. Addressing fisherfolk or farmers, teachers, youth, journalists, all these things actually connect very well if philanthropy does it thoughtfully, which global philanthropy doesn't have the time to do. They'll have one person for Latin America and the Caribbean, and they won't be able to zoom down on that so well. So I think a local philanthropy and an organization like Carifil can offer that thinking and connecting and strategic planning. I think probably I'll leave it there for that slide. Let me see if I can get the next one down. So I think it's good to think about some of the strengths of the region in the global climate finance context. It's as you all know, a diverse and rich region. We're all currently trying to reframe the small island developing states concept to the big ocean states concept, which talks about the wealth of resources and the space that we occupy and how we are a home for climate solutions. The Caribbean has long had its own ways of seeing the world as a product of its history, as a product of its position in global society, and the way global systems are formed. The Caribbean has probably been one of the most innovative and frontline leaders in global discussions about climate. It is the region that framed the issue of loss and damage. It is the one that is talking about debt and the relationship with climate finance. It's the one that's innovating on multidimensional vulnerability indexes. So I think the global leadership of the Caribbean can be well accompanied by local philanthropy supporting local vision as well. As I said, the Caribbean is a negligible emitter, and it's used that globally to try and get more adaptation finance. And I think that's a critical sort of political positioning that remains relevant. Challenges. Again, as I say, international funding is conditioned by external interests. International funding is shrinking. We've all seen what's happened to US aid, which did do support to climate. We're all seeing how the UK is switching to defense funding rather than development and climate funding. So that's a gap that's being left. I think the Caribbean offers challenges for private investment in climate adaptation and mitigation because of its small size, because of the costs of supply chains and so on. And there's a gap there that it's very hard to adapt to respond to from an international perspective. And there's an opportunity there for local philanthropies to innovate, especially with their business know-how. And I think we all know about the brain drain in the region. And the lack of support to civil society organizations contributes to that brain drain because people who want to do civil society activism around climate cannot find sustainable livelihoods. And that means that there's a loss of expertise, innovation, and so on and so forth. So, Caribbean philanthropy can try and support civil society and to play its role in leading on thought and action for adaptation that governments can't do and no one else can do. I think that's sort of my initial thoughts on the Caribbean in the context of in the global finance context. I wanted to mention briefly a little bit how we thought about philanthropy as a global philanthropy on climate. And when our focus was political, it was on climate justice. So it's very much about raising voices to be critical in international arenas and so on. But we invested in a lot of local work as well. So that was the first level of the work, investing in people to engage on climate policy. We also supported governments to develop and implement policy based on people's views and needs. And we also projected, which I think is a more difficult area for local philanthropy to fill, global positioning of Caribbean voices on critical issues, on debt, on climate, on loss and damage, on energy transitions, and so on and so forth. And just to give an example of the richness of what's available for climate philanthropy in the region to support, just as I say, a bit of an unorganized set of photos, but right in the middle there, you can see our friend in St. Lucia who's working with local farmers, women farmers, who are strengthening their capacity to respond to climate change in order to provide food security in the region. And this is a network of women farmers across the region, really thinking about the practical issues of climate change. How do we ensure food security, given all the problems of our food importation bills and so on? How do we make sure it's sustainable, and how do we respond to food security issues? On the left, you can see Girls Care, which is an organization we supported, working with girls and very young women to educate them about climate and empower them to act on climate and find solutions. What else is there? On the right, you can see we funded Climate, the name's gone, Climate Tracker, which supports a range of journalists around the country to talk about climate impacts at a local level, whether it's the Kalinago in Dominica or senior citizens elsewhere, to try and get more understanding of how climate is affecting different populations and what solutions are needed. Again, more examples. This is youth who went to COP to talk about Caribbean perspectives. When I first went to COP 26 in Glasgow in 2020, there were 5 Caribbean civil society voices present talking about their realities. Last year we had 60 or 80 different people we supported to be there to join with other global youth and talk about the Caribbean perspectives and what is needed at international level. We supported local organizations talking about debt, because debt and the debt crisis that the international system generates for the Caribbean is critical for addressing funding for climate responses. And there's so much more. And on the left there, you can see an organization in Jamaica, on the right, sorry, an organization in Jamaica that's looking at urban planning and climate and working with a whole range of actors, local governments, civil society, to try and think through how do we make Caribbean societies more sustainable and more pleasant for people to live and so on. So I can carry on going about all the different aspects. Someone mentioned research in a previous talk. We're supporting Caribbean researchers on trade and how that has to respond to climate change. In the middle there at the top, you can see Rana Haynes, who is one of the Caribbean's leading climate negotiators from Trinidad, who's also the head of Climate Analytics Caribbean, who's sort of carrying the baton for Caribbean actors globally. We supported a policy by the OECS on contingent rights, where people are displaced from one country to another within the region, how they can access their social services and so on. So what I was trying to say there is there's many initiatives that Caribbean philanthropists could support, but and it's very clear that they can't substitute global finance, the scale of global finance, or government action. But what they can do is support frontline leadership from the Caribbean, whether at a local level or regional level or globally. They can kind of think together with the assistance of organizations like CARIPHIL and under CLASP to join the dots on the different sectors that need to be involved and connected to take sustainable decisions on climate and to make the action be greater than the sum of the parts. But again, there's some philanthropy in the region, local philanthropy, but the need to join together, have common strategies, I think is offered by CLASP and CARIPHIL. So very happy to tell more about what we've done, what we've learned from the work we did supporting from outside. But I think the conclusion for us was more local philanthropy will be much more effective than global philanthropy can be alone. So thanks, Anthea, for the invitation, and hi to everybody else.
Well, thank you, Auro, for for your thought leadership and your comprehensive presentation in just 5 to 10 minutes. And you said so many things there, but I think it reinforces the important point about the role of Caribbean philanthropy in the space and us coming together. And I really appreciated when you talked about the strengths of the region, and that we are diverse, we have historical understanding, and at the same time we are very connected culturally to what's happening on the ground, which global philanthropy does not have. And so we play a special role within the space. And at the same time, we understand the challenges that are ahead of us, as well as the opportunities. And in particular, the slides that you shared about our local groups, you can't get that unless you're connected and you have the relationships. And so as we talk about developing this funder commitment, we have to keep all of this in mind, and to ensure that we have everybody at the table, it needs to be at the table, to develop the comprehensive commitment that would culturally competently reflect Caribbean realities. So thank you so much, Aura. And we're going to sort of use what you've shared there as a backdrop when we begin to put the philanthropy funder commitment together. So I appreciate that. And we're going to go into conversation about it. And so I'm looking forward to that. I know time is of the essence as well. It's 10:42 here. And what I would like to do is I'm going to introduce you again to Erika and turn it over to Erika, who you just met. Again, who is a vital partner in advancing climate philanthropy globally. So she's going to walk through the 7-pillar framework for us, which is, again, I said, a structured model designed to help foundations and philanthropy organizations align with the work they're doing around climate action. The framework, I must share, it's the outline, and it can be embedded in what we do within our philanthropic spaces, but it offers us climate levels that allow funders to self-assess and track their progress over time. So I'm just going to ask Erika to share with us the framework and how it's working globally, and then we can just go into an interactive conversation after her presentation. So over to you, Erika. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anthea. I'm going to quickly share my screen, and I will try
Can you
and be
share?
swift because I know time is of the essence and we really want to hear from the group
Yes,
that's here.
yes.
Okay, so what is Philanthropy for Climate? We've been hearing kind of about this movement and the piece that we're working on together with Carrie, Phil, and hopefully a lot of you or most of you here today. And thank you, Auro, for the context, because I think a lot of the pieces that you mentioned are the motivators behind why we also started putting together this Philanthropy for Climate movement back in 2021. So Philanthropy for Climate is a global movement of philanthropy organizations committed to taking urgent and transformative action on climate change. It is a movement where all foundations, regardless of size, geographic location, or thematic focus, are encouraged to integrate climate considerations from governance to grant making in their organization. So really across all of the work that a foundation does, both external in the sense of the programs that are being designed and the grant making that they're doing, but also internally to think about the governance conditions that are set up in their organization to allow them to act on climate. Why did we set up Philanthropy for Climate? So as Auro brought to us the forefront, this looming 2%, we know that less than 2% of philanthropic dollars at a global level go to climate mitigation, and much less is known about the figures of adaptation, but we know it's less. And of that, less than 2% goes to the Caribbean. So we're getting kind of exponentially smaller as we look at the regional focus. We know that climate change represents a reputational and existential threat to the pursuit of philanthropic organizations everywhere and all of the development focuses. We know that all foundations can and must play a role now to consider climate. Climate must be on everyone's to-do list. We need all of us to activate on this if we hope to reach the scale of solutions that match the scale of the crisis. We know that philanthropy can have a greater impact on climate beyond just the commitment of resources, but that there are other levers that philanthropy can leverage to have an impact, and this we'll see through the pillars. And we also know and are very motivated by, for Philanthropy for Climate, by the fact that if we continue to work in silos within our sector and also across sectors, we are missing out on the power of the collective. If we align strategies, if we learn from each other, both, again, kind of in a national, regional context, but global, we can have a stronger and more lasting impact on climate as a sector. What is the state of Philanthropy for Climate right now? So Philanthropy for Climate currently is primarily championed by local or national or also regional philanthropy support organizations like Carrie, Phil in this sense, that host localized commitments. So we see commitments being led in the UK, in Spain, in France, in Italy and Poland, as well as in Canada, in Brazil, in South Africa. These are national commitments that come under the Philanthropy for Climate umbrella. We also have a regional commitment in the Arab region, which is the first, and we're taking a lot of lessons learned around the regional aspect of this to also communicate some of those here as we work with Carrie, Phil on a regional commitment. And then at the international level, we lead a commitment ourselves at Wings in very close partnership with our friends over at Philea, which is the European Philanthropy Association. Under these 10 commitments, we are currently bringing together over 900 foundations who are united in their commitment to action through our pillared framework. To date, there's no representation from the Caribbean. And I mean, actually, you'll see because of the nature of the commitments, there's much more representation from Global North philanthropy than there is from the geopolitical Global South. And one of the focuses for the movement and for the development of it is how do we diversify this voice? We know that those who have who hold the solutions and who hold very close relationships with local communities and innovative solutions for climate are located in different areas than in what is currently represented. And so that's another reason why we're very excited to work with Phil on supporting a local adaptation to represent and amplify the voice of Caribbean philanthropy in this growing global movement. What is the climate journey? So I'm going to deep dive into these pillars in the next slides, just go through them a little bit, but here's kind of an overview of what Philanthropy for Climate offers to the foundation signatories. So we really see it as a journey where all foundations have a role to play, whether you are a non-climate foundation or a climate funder. The movement provides a structured, inclusive, and accessible framework based in these kind of different levels of experience for climate philanthropy, which we see here in this kind of image figure, where we see folks that are just getting started, others that are building momentum, and then those that are demonstrating leadership on climate philanthropy. And we're encouraging foundations to continue to go further through this commitment and through the different levels. So, I mean, in a kind of very practical way, how does it work? So a foundation will sign a Philanthropy for Climate commitment and make their commitment public. Through the commitment, foundations are enabled to learn about how climate affects their work and how they can take action through the framework, through different resources, through programmatic offerings, both at the level of the regional commitment in this case, but also internationally to engage with all of the different commitments that exist. Then foundations, of course, act on this education and on the learnings that they've built up and are making measurable progress across all of the pillars. And then lastly, we see foundations kind of progress. So foundations are reporting on the progress that they're seeing, measuring the impact, communicating the growth, and planning to continue kind of repeating this cycle after this report process. And kind of it's a self-evaluation and a sharing of lessons learned to be able to then go further. So the 7-pillar framework, just a bit of where it came from. It was created by a participatory process that we led at Wings in 2021 of over 40 philanthropic organizations that represented over 22,000 foundations across the globe. So we brought together different support organizations that sat on a steering committee and that had this very large representation of foundations. To help us kind of put together a framework whereby climate action became integrated using a multi-sectional and multi-pillared approach to showcase the levers that foundations have. We also have an implementation guide that I'll be able to share that was developed to help foundations understand what actions they can take under each pillars. So there are a list of suggested actions, suggested ways to monitor them as well through the implementation guide. Okay, so education. This is the first pillar, and I really see this as kind of the gateway and entry pillar. And education is about creating opportunities for all foundation actors, including your board, your staff, your investment committees, your volunteers, all of the stakeholders that exist within and engage with your foundation to learn about the causes and impacts and the solutions of climate change and how it implicates the work of the foundation. Why is this important? Well, we know that implementing a commitment of this kind of like this and this urgent requires the support of the entire ecosystem that supports the foundation, and that effective action will be enabled by building up climate literacy of everyone. What are signatories doing? So of these 900 signatories, what have we seen happening? And I list some of the examples under each of the pillars, but again, we can go into more questions and I can share some more examples afterwards. But we see things under this pillar happen, like hosting lunch and learns between staff and their grantees. A lot of foundations attending global events to learn about, for example, the COP. A lot of foundations attending events like that to use them as educational opportunities. We see other foundations that are creating climate learning opportunities for their communities more broadly. So how are they really going beyond their walls, but also engaging the rest of the community on this learning journey? The second pillar is the commitment of resources. So of course, this is, I would say the more mainstreamed pillar when we talk about climate philanthropy. It's the moving of the money. But how we talk about the commitment of resources is really about committing both financial and non-financial resources to accelerate the work that addresses the cause of climate change and adaptations to its impacts. Why is this piece important? Well, we know kind of at this more global level and some of the context is that international goals on climate finance are not being met. The commitments that are happening at that international level are not sufficient. So what is the role that philanthropy can play to step into this gap? And as Auro mentioned, philanthropy is not a silver bullet to fill this gap. We cannot meet the scale, but we can play a catalytic role to unlock more financing. And we have the potential to move a lot of resources that are our own, but again, through this catalytic role that we play as a sector. What are some of the activities that folks are taking under this who are signatories? So we see a lot of foundations that are contributing to pooled funds, right? Again, this kind of catalytic opportunity of philanthropy. How can we be stronger together? We see granting to philanthropy support organizations. I mean, we can talk about the catalytic role also of PSOs and how they can further create and enable climate action from philanthropy. We see different organizations starting to put in different climate granting focuses through both kind of thematic, but also geographic portfolios. We see, of course, giving in emergency situations in response to natural disasters. The third pillar is integration. And so here we talk about embedding climate into the design and delivery of philanthropic programs, but also into the strategy aspect. So how are we looking at integration, again, across the whole operations of a foundations? How are we integrating climate considerations into the ways that we're creating strategies, drafting new strategies for a foundation, but also all the way into the day-to-day decisions of the organization, right? Through grant making, through the ways that you put together your call for proposals, how are we making sure that climate considerations really are integrated into all of what a foundation does? And we know this is important because the causes and solutions of climate change interact with many other fields of philanthropic focus, and that if we make productive links across these different fields and foster positive action, we can have a bigger and greater impact. The fourth pillar is endowments and assets. And so this is really about considering climate change in relation to the source and management of operational or any endowed funds, and that also seeking to align investment strategies and the implementation with climate considerations and with considerations around net zero. What we've seen here, the why it's important. We know that many philanthropies steward significant assets, right? How are we making sure that those assets that are not being used in the grant making of the foundation's activities, but how are we making sure that those are also creating a positive impact on climate change? How are we making sure that investments are mission aligned and working for the causes with which philanthropy interacts and not against? We also know that as a sector, we need a shifting financial system, and what's the role that philanthropy can play in doing that, in making sure that we're asking for different investment vehicles that are cleaner and more aligned with climate action. How are we seeing this happen through signatories? Some are measuring the impacts of their portfolios. Others are divesting from fossil fuels. Some are setting net zero targets. Others are working with asset owners to drive action at the corporate level. So influencing kind of outside the philanthropic sphere. Pillar 5, we're almost done. We have 2 to go. The 5th pillar is operations. This, to me, I call it the walking the talk pillar. How are we making sure that we're committing to public action, to climate action publicly and outside, but what's the internal work that we're doing as a foundation? So how are we minimizing the impacts of a foundation's own operations? Some of the signatories are doing this by, setting travel and procurement policies that are climate conscious. Some are calculating their carbon footprint of their operations and then deciding how to start lowering that. Others are looking at different forms of certification that they can achieve to validate this operational aspect and to really green their operations. For the 6th pillar, we talk about influencing and advocacy. This is really about leveraging the influencing power of your foundation, amplifying the the voices of frontline communities, advocating for more ambitious climate action from other stakeholders as well, including business, governments, multilateral civil societies. We know that foundations often hold more power than their grantee partners. So what is the power? How are you leveraging as a foundation this power of access to spaces that you have, access to connections that you have to advocate for better climate action across sectors and to really amplify the voices of the partners that you work with? What are signatories doing along this? Seeking opportunities to meet and engage with frontline communities, funding policy and advocacy, funding legislative campaigns and actions within different global networks. A lot of them are also advocating for philanthropy for climate within their networks, and engaging in different spaces, different fora like COPs, where they can connect with government and other stakeholders to do this kind of advocacy work. Lastly, we have transparency. So when we came to put Philanthropy for Climate together, we didn't just want to put another commitment into the philanthropic sector that didn't have an accountability and ambition-raising mechanism integrated within it. So under the transparency pillar, all of the signatories that are a part of the commitment are asked every year to report back and publish information on what they've done across these 7 pillars. How have they worked to implement them? We see this piece as not only a way to for signatories to honor their commitment, but also as a way for us to build up the field, right? To feed back on best practices, lessons learned, what's been working, what hasn't been working, by really shifting those mindsets through the storytelling of how foundations have been implementing this commitment. We also talk about it as a way to generate more data for and by the sector. There's a kind of critical lack of data around climate philanthropy. So how can we, as this growing global movement that now brings together 900 organizations, create and drive a system that gets data around, again, what's working, what's not working, and what's the impact that's being had by philanthropy? It's really around strengthening the ecosystem more broadly beyond just kind of the accountability mechanism for signatories themselves. How are signatories doing this? Of course, by participating in the progress tracking. Also, of course, by sharing about their commitment through things like their annual reports, through their blogs, through public speaking engagements. Oh, okay, I'm done here. Wait. Oh, I wanted to briefly talk about some of the achievements and impacts to date, but I know we're kind of at time. What I do want to say is that we just recently, I'm actually going to stop sharing so that I can look at everyone. We just recently published a report of the international commitment, and I'm going to link it here later. But what this report is showing us is that kind of at a higher level is that the commitment is being seen as a very useful tool by signatories to help them shape and sustain their climate action. But what we're seeing is that their kind of progress across the pillars is uneven. A few of the pillars that we're seeing foundations struggle with include the integration pillar, so really understanding and kind of implementing how climate can become deeply integrated into their foundation's work. The operations pillar is also seeming to be a challenge and a struggle. And also the endowments and assets pillar, we're seeing as, having a higher barrier to entry for foundations. So these are 3 of the pillars that are going into the kind of focus of our programming plan, whereby we support the capacity building across these pillars for foundations to be able to implement them at a higher level. So I'll stop there. I know we're going to go into some group discussion. Anthea, over to you, but I'm really looking forward to working on this together.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Erika. And this session that we're going to go into now is going to help us to talk with everyone that's here about, about the 7 pillars and how it works, how it's going to work for us. What I appreciate about this model is that it meets funders where they are. So whether you're just getting started or if you're building a momentum or showing leadership, there's a place for all of us on this journey. Each of the pillars that Erika shared reflects a different but essential part of how we show up for climate justice through what we fund, how we operate, how we learn, and how we lead. But when taken together, they don't just represent actions, they represent a mind shift for philanthropy in our region. So as we move into our breakout groups now, we're going to break out into 2. Dwayne is going to take us through what we'll be doing in these two groups. But I encourage all of you to reflect honestly on whether your organization stands across these pillars or, more importantly, where you want to grow. This is not perfection in any shade of the imagination. It's about the progress and about working together so we can move together in one step across the Caribbean. So the questions here, what we will talk about, the first question we will focus on is, how do you see the pillars resonating in the context of philanthropy in the region, or across the region, or within you in the context of your organization? And question 2, we'll ask you more about, what is happening within your organization right now, philanthropic or otherwise, and what you're doing to track impact, and what types of supports you need to internally help track. And then most importantly, what are some of the opportunities and near-term actions that our foundations can pursue to advance climate philanthropy? And then, of course, after this, we'll come back, talk about it, and then talk about who we need to make sure is in the room so that we can begin to draft this particular commitment. So let's go into our breakout rooms.
Our discussion, of course, didn't have enough time. So I would like to give Hiram the opportunity to just finish what he was saying, right? And then we could get back to the scheduled agenda. But he was in the middle of something important.
Thank you, Tyler. Basically, I was just making sound echo of what Auro said, that climate in the Caribbean is specific to specific necessities. We are getting hit, especially us in Puerto Rico, getting hit with hurricanes in hurricane season, and moving from just mitigation, and we need to be more not reactive, but more proactive into the decisions that we make, and creating more spaces with we could be more resilient. I don't like the word resilient, but because it has a stigma, and we need to move beyond that, and our answers should be the strategic to the work that we do in the Caribbean. And yeah, I agree with what it was said before.
Yeah. Can you speak to the resilience question a little bit more, Hiram? What do you mean when you say we should move beyond the resilience?
Well, what I said is we are resisting, right? We're trying to be resilient, and I don't want to put a negative conjunction to it, but we cannot forever be resilient or be in a state of resiliency. We need to move and to be in a state of progress. So if we adapt ourselves to be in a state of resiliency, then we adjust ourselves and create resiliency and normalcy. And that's what I'm saying. We need to move beyond being in a state of resiliency to be in a state of progress and in a state of dignity and health.
Okay, I understand. Makes sense to me. And Tyler, anybody else who wanted to report back? Did you designate somebody, or are you reporting?
I'll just quickly report because in the interest of time. So the group the group got into the fact that while these pillars would have been developed by wings with a large group representative of these larger foundations, we still think we need to drill down more in the Caribbean context. And I think it's important, but both Aura, Sharice, and I think all of us in the group, whilst we were talking about the work, some of the pillars do, of course, education and advocacy is one that all of us work on. But some of the pillars, they are still not reflecting more of the proactive versus reactive work we need to get done. And Aura made a strong point in, even to some degree influencing law and policy in our part of the world because it just takes so long. And well, my 2 cents to this is because it just takes so long to get done. So, in the past, we've seen some grants that have been specifically talking about, or programs talking about supporting governments, even their training and capacity building. And I think that's where Aura was coming from as well. So the pillars need to be looked at very much in more of a Caribbean context, and even probably minus or added from that point of view.
I think Erika is smiling because I know that with all the 900 signatories there, but there are some countries that actually added a pillar, and there's some countries that actually deleted a pillar. And we have the opportunity to do whatever we want to make sure that it reflects our reality here in the Caribbean. So that's great. So we just need to, when we develop our committee, this is what we will do. We would look and see what pillar works and what pillar doesn't, and if we're able to add to it, that is our nuance for the Caribbean. Erika, you want to do a quick recap of what we talked about in our session?
Yeah, sure. Quickly, well, I think similarly, a lot of the pillars kind of resonated at a more kind of higher level, but understanding that when you get into them, they need to be contextually adapted to what the actual reality on the ground is. One of the things that we talked about was really kind of the need to connect knowledge and kind of knowledge sharing and capacity building at a peer level across the region, and how this can be a vehicle to be able to do that. But that we need to be conscious that capacity differs in terms of, and that there are kind of barriers to this collaboration, this collective learning, including kind of the travel, like being in different physical locations, barriers around tech, barriers around language too for the region. We talked about also how we leverage the diversity of what the philanthropy ecosystem looks like in the Caribbean, from kind of corporate funders, what's their role, private funders, community foundations, all the way to kind of intermediaries, and more kind of, what kind of nonprofit organizations who play the role sometimes of those intermediaries as the conduit for resources to get to the ground. What's the role of each of these different organizations, and how do they become reflected in a framework that is more general? So, but kind of seeing that, I guess, and the diversity as a challenge, but how do we leverage the opportunity of that diversity within the commitment and the framework that comes out of it? So those are kinds of some of the key pieces we spoke about.
Okay. Yes. Okay, great. And so, where we are now, we're in a place where we both we've got I wouldn't say a bird's eye view. We got a good understanding of what the pillars can offer for us in the Caribbean. And I think having our individual conversations, we're able to drill down and in terms of what these 7 pillars could do for us, or how it could work on our behalf here within the region, and that we need to spend a little bit more time thinking through the pillar framework as it relates to the Caribbean realities. And as Erika shared, the intermediary conversation is a big one because we have many intermediaries here in the Caribbean. with a strong connection to the community that could actually help shape what this particular commitment could look like. And also Aura gave a presentation of all the different types of non-governmental organizations that do great work that need to be part of this conversation as well. And of course, more specifically in the context of environmental and advocacy considerations, our work looks differently here. And probably we are probably a step ahead in a lot of ways globally. The Caribbean has a lot to share in terms of how we do it here within our space. And so our next idea at this point would be to spend time thinking about who else needs to be in the room specifically. And this is where we will ask you upfront to name, if you want to name people, actual organizations, or sectors that should be at the table so that we can design this commitment that reflects the Caribbean, who is legitimate, who is most impactful. If we could speak to that particular group more specifically. So naming the institutions, the networks, leadership circles that can amplify our effort. This is the time that we can talk about it more specifically, so that our next meeting, we're able to include and expand and develop the committee to begin to formulate the commitment and review the pillars more specifically.
Let me go first.
Yeah.
I believe that, maybe the university body, whether in Jamaica, not specifically like, any other Caribbean country, but the University of Technology, University of West Indies, NCU, all of those universities and student body can be a part of the change. And I guess, that would actually cover the Pillar 6, which is influence and advocacy aspect of it, and also education and learning. So I think those bodies would actually be very crucial in the building, of
Okay.
this.
Okay, and with people are dropping off, so I just want to make sure. Anybody else before you drop off? Wallen, do you want to say anything?
Sorry, I just wanted to jump in because what I was going to contribute was related to that as well with regards to Pillar 6. I think media bodies should also be included because they are key partners in really building those narratives. So media bodies, whether it be print, video, traditional media, I didn't see any representation from media.
Right, we didn't invite media, Sharice, to this meeting, but I know that that's something. Maybe you want to show the other slide as well, Dwayne. Anybody else? What else? Any names? And then we will call you for specific names who you think we should include specifically for our next meeting. Anybody else?
Hi, this is Karen here. I saw y'all had UNEP and UNDP, but in addition to those, I actually thought of ECLAC, UNECLAC, as well, and also WFP, so that's World Food Program as well, would probably be a good idea to include as well.
Okay, great. Anybody else?
I saw on the first one there was diplomatic. Any slide before, yeah.
Okay.
Right, diplomatic, okay.
That's good. And we had so Sharice, we'll talk to you because we did meet with our diplomatic contingent here in Trinidad. And so we'll talk more about that. Anybody else? Okay, so let's move on because I know time. So what we wanted to show with you quickly is our next steps and formation of our funder commitment committee. So in terms of our core areas, let me see what you have here. Dwayne, I can't see what you have. Okay. All right. So in phase 1 here, we have engagement and knowledge building. And we will begin with awareness and outreach here. So this includes the podcast series that we started to do, ongoing knowledge building sessions, and the continuation of technical assistant workshops to deepen our understanding across our network. So we'll be reaching out not only to Wings, but also to others who could sort of give us more information and more data around climate philanthropy regionally and also globally to influence our work. Our step 2 will include drafting and data collection as well. And here is where we will be drafting the funded commitment, as well as distributing a Caribbean climate philanthropy survey, which will be able to gather critical data on where funders are and what supports we need. We have templates from others in terms of what that survey will include. So there'll be some set questions that we would use so that we can do a comparative analysis globally, and then there'll be specific questions that will be dedicated to the region as well. And the survey will be done in a way so that people would fill it out, and that it would be something that would be onerous and complicated. So we have a draft that we would share with our committee to start the process. In terms of phase 2, we have a review and refinement component. So here is where we'll spend time on survey analysis of those funders that have filled out the survey, and using the expanded technical working group to review insights, and as well as ensure that it's a collaborative process as well. And then we'll have a progress report that we will do. And here is where we will begin to share how our funders in the region are advancing across the pillars that we have agreed that we're going to use for the Caribbean, and allow us to sort of share lessons learned as we go through this process, as well as some current strategies being used to strengthen the accountability and transparency across our philanthropic community based upon the surveys. And I guess phase 3 will be our public presentation. So our intent would be whatever we have, but we will present a draft funder commitment at our philanthropic forum, and there is where we can engage more specifically with other funders that will be in the room around our draft commitment. So this gives us another opportunity to share and present what we come up over the next few months. And of course, the global alignment will happen in step 6, which we'll be able to share our progress at our UN climate change conference, COP30 in Belém in Brazil. So that's the plan. Any questions there? The quick timeline will be, do we have a timeline, Dwayne, that you want to share? As well, and so the timeline goes from started in October all the way through November. And so we did kick off in October at the Philanthropy Forum. We did that. That's phase 1. And where we are now is we're technical assistance, knowledge building, and drafting of the funded commitment, which is May through July. So you'll be hearing from us in terms of a formulation of committees so that we can get going in terms of drafting the commitment. And of course, the phase 2, which I've already shared with you, will include, as I say, data collection, refinement, funded commitment, and signature mobilization, and of course, reporting and public presentation as well. And so what I would like to go through now would be those who are here, if you could indicate interest for the committee that we'll be forming, so that you can begin to review a very, 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 very draft commitment, as well as a place where we will go through the pillars more specifically and add those actors that you have suggested to be part of the process. So Dwayne, do you want to just share a little bit on that?
Hi, Anthea. So
Yeah.
I'm thinking that just based on the time frame, what we could do is just touch base with some of the individuals who were on the call to kind of explain to them afterwards just what we want to do in the next step, and in so doing, get their commitment and buy-in. I think it's a great space at this point. We're 9 minutes to the top of the hour, and a little bit over the time that we had to just put a wrap on the day, and then we can always talk through how do we communicate and follow up with them. But it's been a great set of discussion. I've been popping in and out of the breakout rooms, and it's been fantastic.
Wonderful. If you want to put in the chat that you're interested in being part of the committee for our next meeting, which will be in June, that would be great as well.
And there's a link that Talia placed in the chat earlier. If persons could click on that link, then that would also be useful. I think there are some key questions that we would want answered in there as well. So we could send out something right after.
So there's a menti.com in the chat, which is sort of the quick evaluation for this session. And we'll set you up in terms of us understanding if you're going to be part of the committee for the next committee meeting that we have here. So you'll hear from us in short order in another week or so in terms of when our next committee meeting will be, and we look forward to all of you being there and sharing of the pillar in more specific format. Thank you so much, everybody.